I see. Well, that kind of brings me on to my sort of final question, which is very relevant to what you're saying. I think that in this, you've probably touched on it a fair amount, but it's entirely possible that, say, somebody who's listening to my channel, that's not obviously my channel is about a range of things, but perhaps they're listening to this video and they're realizing that this is them. They're going through something very similar, but this is the first time they've ever heard of it. They're sort of in the very first stages, like the first year, of, if you sort of mean. So I was wondering if you had any sort of advice for them, like what they should go about doing, whether there's any sort of groups that they should look into, or that sort of any sort of advice you'd like to give that sort of person.
Okay, so there's a few communities. This is what I'm saying. From the Freedom from Covert Harassment is a good website. You could join the membership. There's a lot of valuable information that you can get from them. Again, I would document all the occurrences, and don't let people tell you this is. You basically don't back down, because if you're the only person, it makes it really hard, and it's basically out of sociological conformity. This is part of Salomon. Give me one second. This is part of Salomon Ash's experiments. Yeah, conformity experiment. It's not the autokinetic effect. It's Salomon Ash's conformity experiment. I talk about this in the professional digression section of the blog post, where basically they set up actors in a room. So there's like 10 people in a room. They give 3 lines. So A and B are the same length, and then C is a little shorter.
Oh yes.
Okay, so they have 10 people, and all of them are actors except for the experimenter or the experimentee. And so they have everybody say that they're like, what 2 lines are not the same length? And everybody in the room except for the experimentee says A and B when it's obviously really B and C. So out of mere conformity, the experimentee actually agrees with all the other people, although it's obvious that it's B and C. The experimentee agrees and says it's A and B that are not the same length when they obviously are. So it creates a very real psychological condition of conformity.
Yeah, I came across something. It might have been on your channel. I've got source amnesia for it, but it was where they I can't remember exactly how they found this out, but they found out that it wasn't just that the experimental subject was lying. It actually affected their perception of reality.
Yeah, yeah, and so that's actually what they'll do. They'll make it look as though through this environmental theater, through this entertainment theater, and basically manipulating through these directed energy weapons to control your mind and semantic priming. So there's a whole lot of various social mechanisms that they can do to conform your mind. Basically, it's basically a conformity experiment. They basically get your mind to conform. I've never been a conformist, so I was always the hardest to convince of this, or go along with it, or eventually find my way out of the maze of nonsense that they present you with. But I would stick to your guns. Just make sure that you definitively find what is real through logic, and you stick with that. And that's basically what's helped me the most, is being able to see through the clutter of nonsense, is to understand that it's a mind game. B, you're not alone. There's a lot of people going through this. That's the other thing that's really helpful, is that they make you look as though and convince you that you're crazy, by saying, oh, there's nobody else. You really just got to go to the internet to see how many people there's actually being affected by this. So basically, I'm just going to talk about the Gangstalking conspiracy defined, because they create social mechanisms. Basically, and then we'll talk about how to combat that. Basically, what happens is, for this human experimentation program, as explained thus far, is therefore attack the victim with directed energy weapons, causing synthetically created mental illness, drive the TI into police custody, which, due to public ignorance and police protocol will land them in a mental institution where the TI is giving a condemning diagnosis, possibly microchipped, as 30 to 40% of people are TIs are admit a radio frequency admission, and then released so that the perpetrators, whether human, machine, or a combination of both, can pursue the victim with impunity. So unfortunately, you can't go to the cops because if they have this protocol is if you talk about you're being stalked by the government, and especially if you're hearing voices in your head, they have what's called a 5150, where they actually will bring you to a mental institution for evaluation. Once you're there, you're there, professional will take a look at your instance, and there's basically what Dr. John Hall talks as a turnkey schizophrenic diagnosis. So if you're saying that you're hearing voices from the outside and it's government harassment, then they will automatically give you schizophrenia and delusional disorder. This is so prominent and so strong. I give an instance of a report on the television where there's 300 people in Cochlea Valley, Palm Springs, that are all hearing the same external voice called Lisa. And it's obviously coming from external through directed energy weapons. And then basically they have a psychiatrist that comes out and is in his private practice and basically tells these individuals that they're delusional when it's like 300 people. You know what I mean? All complaining of the same thing. So, these like psychological operations, and this is like Dr. John Hall talks about informing and educating the psychiatric, the professional psychiatric institutions on. He's educating them as a medical doctor on this because they just don't have it in the DSM-4. And as he argues, a lot of people that were involved in MK Ultra are now at the leading helm of the writing the psychiatric diagnosis, which is why they've basically created societal entrapment with this program, because you get stalked from directed energy weapons, which are not recognized by the public or in any professional context, whether that be police or the mental health care profession. And then, so when people are attacked through these directed energy weapons, they are only further condemned by society rather than being vindicated for justice. So it creates a conundrum for somebody that wants to protect themselves and fight back, which is why they say carry a daily log and to vindicate your own story, because it's obvious that there's a serious epidemic happening in America, and that's why I'm here, is to take care of this, because something needs to change. If you're a targeted individual, it's such an inherent problem, and it drives you to suicide because not only do you get attacked every day, but there's no help. There's literally no help, whether that's societal or internal social network, and people condemn you for it, when really it's a giant misunderstanding, a fundamental societal sickness that needs to be fixed.
I see. Well, that kind of wraps up my questions. Thanks very much for your time and answering those questions. It's been very good. And
it's a pleasure.
For people who are listening, your YouTube channel is Jim NE Cricket. I'll put a link to it below, and I'll advise all of you to subscribe and check out his videos because they're awesome.
YouTube.com/political persecution.